Welcome to As a Woman, Fertility Hormones and Beyond. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Crawford, and I am a board-certified OBGYN and fertility physician, and also co-founder of Fora Fertility in Austin, Texas. Each week on this podcast, I discuss health and fertility and how they relate to your true self. Become a part of the community of collaboration that amplifies others as a woman. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome back to the As a Woman podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Natalie Crawford. Today we are talking all about preparing for IVF, what to do before a cycle or in between cycles, what questions you should ask, and essentially just getting you ready for the process. I know that IVF is not something that anybody really wants to do. IVF is a marathon. Everybody's journey is going to be unique. And my hope for you is that you control what you can, which is what you know, the questions you ask and how you set yourself up for success, and then how you treat your body and how you prepare yourself for the process. So that's what we're going to go over today. I'm so thankful for all your support on the As a Woman podcast, as this podcast has grown and really become so incredibly special to me. I am just thankful to all of you. If you have your own questions, you can ask questions on the As a Woman voicemail at 657-229-3672. You can also leave questions on Instagram on Monday at nataliecrawfordmd. Some of those questions will be answered here on the podcast at the end of the episodes or included within, will be answered in the weekly newsletter. So don't forget to sign up at nataliecrawfordmd.com/newsletter or over on the YouTube channel. So don't forget to check out the YouTube Natalie Crawford MD. We have over 200,000 subscribers. It is a great way to absorb some bite-sized content, closer to 10-minute videos. So if you have a specific question, highly searchable, go check out the YouTube. So today we're going to talk about IVF. We're going to talk you through how to prepare, what you need to do ahead of time, the timing and understanding IVF, and questions you should be asking, a few different basics about protocols, and then how to prepare your body.
Hi, Dr. Crawford. I have a question regarding what to do while preparing to start IVF. So my husband and I have been trying to conceive for almost 2 years now, and we sought a reproductive endocrinologist a little more than a year ago. And everything came back normal for him or above average for his semen analysis. For myself, I was diagnosed with diminished ovarian reserve, but everything else, HSG, TSH, T3, T4, follicle count, everything else was relatively normal for my age. I'm currently 34, and due to financial reasons, we have been unable to proceed with IVF. However, I did accept a job that provides coverage for fertility treatment, but I have to wait until I've been employed for 12 months. So my question is, what should I be doing now in order to help myself prepare for IVF? Are there any diets that you would recommend? I know you've previously mentioned about a low-inflammatory diet, so I would love to hear more about that, or any additional supplements that I should be taking. I'm currently taking a prenatal vitamin, a CoQ10, and vitamin D. Thank you for all that you do and for answering all of these questions. I look forward to hearing your answer and learning more. Thank you.
All right, so this is a scenario that I find sometimes you maybe have identified the next step of action and it's IVF, but for logistical reasons, maybe you're saving money, maybe it's insurance, maybe it is lifestyle or travel or work, you're having to wait a period of time. And I think this is a good opportunity to dive into things that you can do and make sure you understand the process completely. I think one thing, this just is in general, if you are purposefully waiting, so essential that you have all the information you need. I have seen people wait and then go and find out that the insurance they were waiting for is not accepted at the clinic they are at. So I want you to make sure that if you're waiting to get your fertility insurance, okay, my questions to start. What is the insurance going to cover? And make sure the insurance is going to be accepted at the clinic you're at. Otherwise, this is an ideal time to go establish care at a place that you can have treatment. I also see a lot of times treatment is not covered in the way that we think it is. So in our brain, we say, hey, I'm going to wait 12 months and then I'm going to pay $0. It's all going to kick to my insurance. But maybe my insurance excludes it if I'm in a same-sex relationship, or they exclude genetic testing, or they exclude ICSI, or they exclude blah, blah, blah. And the cost savings may not be worth waiting a year, especially if you have a low ovarian reserve. Ultimately, I know the money's a big expense and a lot of people do need to wait, but I think you deserve to know exactly what that number is in order to make that best decision. So what is covered? Weigh the pros and cons, make sure you're at the right clinic that it can be covered at. IVF takes longer than everybody thinks it does. So if I'm walking you through IVF, there's a few basic differences that you need to ask or know or talk to your doctor about. One is going to be the difference in a fresh and a frozen transfer. Now, most of the field has transitioned to a frozen transfer. And the reason why is it allows better synchronicity of the uterus and the embryos, allows us to select the best embryos, allows us to transfer just one at a time, allows us to have genetic testing of the embryos done if you so choose, and it allows us the opportunity to really understand what you have before you are potentially pregnant. In addition, for patients who might have PCOS or a high egg count or be young, a frozen embryo transfer or freezing all the embryos from the IVF cycle markedly decreases ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, or OHSS, which is something we really don't talk about very much anymore. A fresh transfer is less safe, puts you at risk for OHSS, can be associated with lower pregnancy rates and higher pregnancy complications, likely due to the high hormonal environment of when you put the embryo inside. But it is faster and it might save you a little bit of money, but not as much as everybody thinks because there's still a lot of things happening. I'm a big fan of frozen transfers. I like data and I'm very controlling. And if you're a controlling person and you want to control all the variables involved, you're going to see your doctor lean towards doing a frozen transfer. When you think about IVF and you think about an embryo transfer and we think about nomenclature, IVF is in vitro fertilization. This means it is the act of getting 1 month's group of eggs all to grow. I'm going to take those eggs out of the body and I'm going to fertilize them in the lab. That is the in vitro in lab. And then I'm going to have embryos grow. The difference, a fresh transfer, takes one of these embryos at a day 5 and puts it in the body when it's at the implantation stage, and then might freeze or genetically test others. And a frozen embryo is going to freeze all the embryos once they get to that implantation stage. Every clinic does IVF a little bit different, and you're going to hear me talk a lot about personalizing IVF protocols because it's something I'm passionate about. A lot of clinics, especially those that might be larger, do a lot of cycles, they tend to cycle the same protocol. It's easier. It's easier for if they have lower level providers, if they have more people making decisions, if everything's done the same way. So you want to decrease error and do things the same way. The con is that some patients will not have the response that they could have, and we're compromising that by doing the same protocol to everybody. If I ran an IVF clinic and wanted to make the very most money possible, then hey, when your period starts, bring you in, let's start the stimulation. Officially, you want to start stimulating or growing the eggs, which is what we're really doing here with the IV hormones, is trying to get 1 month's group of eggs to grow. So if I think about in a given month, you have a group of eggs that are all come out of that vault in the ovary. Number of eggs differ based on your age and your ovarian reserve. So if you have low ovarian reserve, you have a lower number of eggs available. If I have less eggs available, I'll get less eggs for IVF than somebody who has normal reserve. But let's say I have 20 eggs outside the vault and my goal is to get all 20 eggs to grow. I am trying to override the normal brain-ovary communication of just getting one to grow. So that occurs, in my opinion, the best in a multi-phase protocol approach where I like to consider suppressing and then stimulating. However, if I wanted to make as much money as possible, baseline, or when you're bleeding, all your eggs are small and you can start stimulation there. You will likely underperform what you might be able to. But if I just wanted to cycle you back to back or do a lot of cycles and make more money and do them faster, that would be a good game plan. But it's often not best for patients, and so we tend not to do it often. Exceptions for me are going to be that if you have a very high egg count and you have a reason why you can't be on birth control pills, maybe cancer, history of a blood clot, etc., we might do, I call this a spontaneous start or a start off your period. But some clinics, this is what they do. I like to lead the protocol with suppression. So if we think about what happens normally, the brain normally sends out FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. That starts to come out while you're on your period, and it is feeding, stimulating that next group of eggs so that one of them will grow and ovulate. Normally, the brain and ovary have very nice checks and balances so that only one grows, right? You don't need a whole litter of babies. You don't need 20 eggs at one time. The analogy I like to use for this is to imagine normal ovulation being a nest of birds. Mommy bird brings in one worm, and the biggest bird gets the worm. It's going to be the one to push the others out of the way, gobble up that worm, and then it becomes the biggest bird. That's spontaneous start. If you're on your period, somebody is already pre-programmed to be the biggest, and it can be hard to really get all of them to grow if that process has started. In a protocol with a type of suppression, and suppression is anything that stops the brain from sending out FSH. If we think of the stimulation, the hormone shots are mostly FSH. I'm going to starve the eggs before I feed them. If I have my nest of baby birds and now I'm not feeding any of them, I have a group of birds that are all very hungry. There is no big bird. Their little beaks are all open. And then if I come in and I dump a bucket of worms in the nest every single day, now all these birds are hungry, eating at the same pace, and growing together. So now I have effectively overridden this process, and I'm able to get all of those birds to grow. And that's why I like, for most people, a suppression before the stimulation. Suppression is anything that stops the brain from sending out FSH. So this could be hormones or hormone modulators, estrogen, progesterone, birth control pill, testosterone, ovulation blockers, Lupron, which works at the GnRH levels of the brain, variety of medications, all impacting hormones before you start your stimulation. The reason why this is important is it changes the timeline. Suppression can be anywhere from 2 to 5 weeks, depending on what you're choosing. Stimulation is then 2 weeks long. And stimulation is what you think about when you think about IVF, hormone shots every day, coming in for ultrasound. As you go through this process, then you're going to get your eggs to maturity. So sometime in that second week, on average, would be about 12 days of stimulation. Eggs will be mature. You'll use a trigger shot, and then you'll have an egg retrieval, which is where we get the eggs out of the body, typically done with IV anesthesia. That's how we do it in our clinic, because a needle is attached to the vaginal ultrasound, and we go vaginally, and we take the eggs out of the body. We then will get a sperm sample at the same time, and we'll be able to do fertilization, which can either be ICSI, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, where you take a sperm and you put it into the egg, or conventional fertilization, where you put the sperm just over all the eggs, find out how many fertilize the next day, and let embryos grow out. There's a lot of attrition with IVF. I have heard all these political people talking about IVF and having 20 plus embryos in the freezer, and how all these babies are being left frozen, and it's so wasteful. And that is just not reality for the vast majority of patients. IVF success is limited by how many embryos you have. Most people don't have enough to have the family they want, especially not with one cycle, and they're having to go through multiple cycles. Of the eggs that you get, you'll have about 75 to 80% that will fertilize of the mature eggs. And you may not get every egg mature. So if I have 20 eggs available and I go to egg retrieval, and let's say 18 of them are mature, and we be happy, and then of those we see about 75 to 80% fertilize, let's say that's 14. About half of these will then grow out to a day 5 or 6 embryo called a blastocyst. This little embryo has gone from a one cell egg and sperm little combo, grown and changed over the course of 5 to 6 days, rapidly exponentially divided. Now it's 300 plus cells at the stage called a blastocyst. And this is the time when an embryo would normally arrive in the uterus and be ready to implant. 50% will make it to just the stage alone. So now we're at 7. And then based on your age, we're going to see what percentage would be genetically normal if we do genetic testing. Let's say you're 35. we're going to expect 40 to 50% to be genetically normal. Let's say 3 out of our 7 are genetically normal, and we're happy with that number. A single genetically normal embryo is going to give you a 65% chance of success in a frozen embryo transfer. That means not everybody will get pregnant off the first transfer, and we'd like to have 2 or 3 genetically normal embryos for any baby you want to have. One of the hardest things for us is wrapping our brain around this time, meaning a month for suppression, 2 months to grow the eggs, a week for the embryos to grow out, maybe a couple weeks to get genetics back, or a week to wait for your period, either one. Then you're going to make sure everything's good for a frozen embryo transfer, an FET. Grow the lining for 3 weeks. Warm up an embryo and put it inside, and you still have a 2-week wait. And if you're not pregnant from that first transfer, which more than a third of people would not be, and that's fine, nothing's wrong with you, it just wasn't the right embryo. Now we got to do another transfer again. That's another couple months. So this will take you 4 to 6 months to get pregnant from the moment you start your suppression or your IVF meds until you get that positive pregnancy test. After 2 cumulative transfers, almost 90% of people are pregnant. After 3, 95%. IVF success is limited by the number of genetically normal embryos you make. But if you are 34 and you're waiting a year and you're going to go through at 35 and you don't have 20 eggs, maybe you have 10 eggs, and you go through the process and in your best case scenario, you get 10 eggs and 8 fertilize and 4 grow out, you will have 1 to 2 normal embryos. That might help you get pregnant right now, but what if you want 2 kids? What if you want 3 kids? It is going to take numerous rounds of IVF. And that's making the presumption that your egg count's not going to drop significantly in the year from now till then. So the first thing, if you're waiting for insurance, etc., make sure your waiting makes sense. Number 2, understand that IVF takes a long time. It just does. So you want to be ready to hit the ground running as soon as you can. People do not regret starting IVF earlier. They regret starting IVF later. I also think a very open discussion about your family planning and realistic expectations from a cycle. Just being young is not enough if you're trying to have more than 1 child from IVF. And if you're going to need more than 1 round of egg retrieval, you want to do that before an embryo transfer. Because if I do a fresh transfer and I put an embryo in and you're pregnant, yay! But what if you want a second kid and none of the other embryos made it? Now you're going to wait another year or 2 to cycle again, and then you're going to have less eggs and more genetically abnormal. If you need more than 1 cycle, is it covered by insurance? Because if only 1 cycle is covered and you're going to need 2 based on math, maybe we should start the second one earlier, do it first, and then get insurance coverage for the second one. So do 1 cycle in your 1-year waiting period, and then do another one once your insurance kicks in. So the timing of IVF is really important when you're considering what should happen, and you can see that if you're waiting or you have insurance coverage, understanding the specifics of that coverage are really, really helpful and important. What should you do during this time period? Beyond just making sure all your testing's been done, you understand what's covered, what's not, you understand your game plan, maybe what your protocol would be, so what the timeline would be. You have an opportunity, a big runway to get your body ready for IVF. And my top tips before IVF are to not change things for an IVF cycle, but change things for your life. If you live a more hormonally balanced day-to-day, you're going to notice you feel better, you have less inflammation, your energy's better, your skin's better, you're happier. And these things trickle down. Your eggs are inside your body impacts how you function. Everything that you put in and on your body impacts your day-to-day function. And please don't forget the sperm. A lot of times I'll see somebody gets a normal semen analysis, yay! But then they don't think about the fact that that doesn't reflect functionality. We're not getting pregnant, so something is still going on. And we will see behaviors and patterns change in a negative way with the idea that my sperm's not the problem. or whatever I'm doing is fine, so I don't need to get healthy. You only have one life and one body. Like, let's get healthy no matter what. So what are my general recommendations? I always say that the diet stuff is never that surprising. We know it's good for our body. What's good for our body is good for our eggs. It's all low inflammation. And I have a recent episode called Preparing for Treatment, and you will see much more detail on some of this. The supplements I recommend: prenatal vitamin D, CoQ10, kind of across the board. I recommend a very whole foods based approach. So you want to avoid refined carbohydrates, added sugar, processed meat. You want to limit red meat. You really want to avoid or limit dairy and gluten, at least until you know if you're sensitive. What that means is I recommend a 30-day elimination. And then when you add them back in, if you notice nothing different, you're good. But if you add them back in and suddenly you feel bloated and GI distress and puffy, fatigued, you might be having a sensitivity. And whether it's an allergy or not doesn't matter, because if you learn to listen to your body, if we're trying to drop inflammation as low as possible, if you're sensitive to something and having inflammation, change it. A lot of the bad in our food comes from getting food to go. So if you're ordering food, if you do takeout a lot, really research places that try to make their food cleaner, have a few go to and be very boring, and think about preparing food at home as much as possible. On my weekly newsletter, every single week, I will give you a recipe. nataliecrawfordmd.com/newsletter. These are always whole food plant-based because I don't eat meat. It is a much healthier way to live. I believe this for me. The research supports this. It also supports very much eliminating meat or reducing it can make a big difference in the number of plants and vegetables you take and how your body functions. But if you don't know what to cook, these are easy recipes. You will like them. My meat-eating husband and son like them. So sign up for the newsletter. You really want to eliminate toxins, which a lot of these do occur in the kitchen. So things like Teflon, plastic, how we prepare food, to-go containers, what food is wrapped in. Also think about things in your house, especially in your bathroom, your makeup and your self-care products. And think about things out in the world like thermal paper and receipts. And you're going to want to both move your body, reduce your stress, and get sleep. You need to get at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep at night and really change up your environment the best you can. And I want you to move your body with the goal of being strong and healthy, not just to burn fat. And then reducing stress is really important. There's a lot of different ways this can be done, but the short answer is you need to find one that works for you. All right, I've got a few more of your IVF questions that we are going to wrap up this episode, trying to answer them in rapid fire. So if you have questions about anything when it comes to your hormones or your health or your fertility, please don't hesitate to call 657-229-3672 or ask your questions on Instagram on Monday at nataliecrawfordmd.
Hi, Dr. Crawford. I have a question about whether or not you recommend waiting or starting another embryo freezing attempt. I'm 29 years old and I have an AMH of 0.821 and diminished ovarian reserve. Within 1 year, my AMH went from 1 to 1.2 down to what it is now, 0.821. My cycles are about 28 days long. My partner's sperm is normal. I've been through one canceled cycle due to 3 lead follicles and 1 egg retrieval cycle that resulted in 4 eggs retrieved, 2 fertilized, but none made it to blast. My canceled attempt was a quick start with Menopur and Gonal. My most recent attempt was with estrogen priming, then Menopur and Gonal. My doctor wants to try a protocol with Clomid this time. I'm also getting married in March. I'm trying to decide whether or not I should pause fertility treatments until after the wedding because we have not tried naturally yet. I want to get pregnant as soon as possible after the wedding in March, but ideally not before then, and we're hoping to have 2 children. Do you think waiting about 6 months could be detrimental to our results? Do you think my AMH levels would drop significantly within this time? And also, do you think it would be worth it to try starting in March naturally, or should we plan to go straight to an IUI or IVF? Thank you so much. I really appreciate you answering everyone's questions and for all that you do. Thanks. Bye.
Congrats on your upcoming wedding, and there's no right or wrong choice. I know I wish we had a crystal ball. We don't regret going through more cycles or having embryos in the bank, especially if you wanted to have more than one child. And this is a scenario, my dream world, where I'd love to have some frozen embryos, then let you get pregnant or try to get pregnant naturally. And if you don't conceive in 6 months, we have the ability to go get more embryos or do an embryo transfer. But we are concerned, based on having low reserve at a young age, what's going to be happening in a couple of years. Why is your egg count low? I will say that the difference in the AMH, 1.2, zero point 0.8, I will often say the truth is probably somewhere in between, but in all of these scenarios, your protocols are understimulating you. Getting canceled for 3 follicles, only getting 4. We should expect that you can do better than this. So I would recommend another cycle to freeze embryos, and I would specifically want to ask, what are the protocol changes, and do we expect them to give us a higher number of eggs? You should be able to get to freezing embryos. I know you're probably gun shy after having it canceled in a failed cycle, but IVF success is a numbers game. So before just jumping into another cycle, I'd really want to talk to my clinic and note what changes we were going to make. And it's not that there's right or wrong changes. A lot of this is trying to personalize it to you. And my litmus test is always, are there changes to make? And if your doctor can look at your cycle and has some ideas, that is a good sign, and we can hope for a different outcome. So ultimately, sending you the best. Congrats on the wedding. If you get pregnant, congratulations, and you don't have embryos in the freezer, that's okay. We don't know that your rate of decline will be a big deal in the future. And what we can always say is that you can start trying at a closer interval or consider freezing your eggs at that time if you want to give more space between kids. So lots of love.
Hi, I just listened to your most recent episode about AMH and anti-follicle count, and now I'm so curious about my situation. So I am approaching my second round of IVF. My first round, my anti-follicle count was 14, so 8 on one side, 6 on the other. And this round, it looks like I'm starting out with 8, so 4 on one side, 4 on the other. And for perspective, I'm only 31 and a half. I'm almost 32. And yet my AMH is 2.7. So in the normal range AMH, but quite low on the follicle count. The first IVF round that we did, it actually, with only 14 follicles seen in the beginning, ultimately it became about 16. Only 9 eggs were retrieved from those follicles, which is interesting. I don't know if that means that a lot of them were empty. And then ultimately we got lucky enough to have 4 euploids out of it, which feels like very, very lucky attrition on the back end. But I'm so curious as I go into the second egg retrieval, starting out with only 8 follicles, maybe we see a few more pop up during stimulation. But it seems like really the most I could possibly hope for is 1 or 2 euploids. But aside from that, it just seems like my anti-follicle count and my AMH are a little bit disconnected. And I don't know if you think that that is indicative of endometriosis. Although I don't have any other symptoms of it, we have had 3 miscarriages in the past, which is what led us to do IVF in the first place. So just curious your thoughts. Thank you so much.
This is a really good question when it comes to egg count and can you really get a good count before a cycle starts and what is to expect. So remember that the goal with an IVF cycle is to try to get all those eggs to maturity. Your first cycle is a good example of 16 eggs maybe growing, but only 9 mature, or getting 9 at retrieval. And when we see that being the case, often it means some eggs were either over or undershot, and most often immature. And if the egg is not close to maturity, you won't be able to often get it at retrieval. Every cycle is a little bit different. But I want to know what changes are being made. I think thoughts. 1, I don't get a follicle count at the start of a cycle, often because different suppressive techniques can lead different results. And it's just not reflective of what we're really going to get. So maybe this 8 was under the influence of Lupron or birth control pills or something. So take it with a grain of salt. However, I do think your first cycle was understimulated compared to what we might be able to expect, especially with number of maturity. So I would want to know what changes we might make to try to get more mature eggs. If I get more mature eggs, I'm going to have a better attrition. You did have great attrition, so congrats on the 4 you played. But we definitely are in a position where it seems like we should be able to perform better. So what changes are going to be made? And maybe it's the same protocol, but maybe it's changing the trigger parameters. Maybe they need to be a different size, or we need a shorter or longer interval at the time of the trigger. Maybe we change the medication or the dosing a little bit. Maybe we're changing the lead-in to the medication, maybe a different type of suppression if we didn't have one, or switching it up if we were potentially over-suppressed. So this is the opportunity when you do a second cycle to really maximize knowledge, because now we have that first cycle data and we can look at that and make changes and hopefully get you in a position to have a better outcome. So I would make sure you're asking some of those specific questions about the cycle plan to change. And I would worry less about seeing 8 follicles at baseline. Now, if these are 8 growing during the stimulation and we really think you could get closer to 16, then that's definitely understimulated and could consider canceling, regrouping with a different game plan to have a better outcome. Ultimately, wishing you all the best and congrats on the euploid that you do have. All right, friends, well, I hope you learned a little bit about IVF, preparing, and the timing, and gave you some things to think about as you're getting ready for a cycle. If you have questions, you can call the As a Woman voicemail at 657-229-3672. Don't forget, check out Instagram at NatalieCrawfordMD on Monday. You can ask questions there, and you can hear more answers to your question here on the podcast, the weekly newsletter at nataliecrawfordmd.com/newsletter, or over on the YouTube channel at Natalie Crawford MD. Thank you, friends. Thank you all for listening to As a Woman. It would mean so much if you could rate, review, and follow the podcast to be notified of new episodes every Sunday. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you share it with someone in your life. Be sure to follow along on Instagram at Natalie Crawford MD, and check out the YouTube channel Natalie Crawford MD. If you're interested in becoming a patient, you can also follow Fora Fertility. I'm so thrilled to have you here, part of the community that amplifies others as a woman.